All right, and we're back. Welcome back to yet another episode of the Blasters and Blades podcast. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, before I let the guests introduce themselves, I've got to say, Nick, I had to kidnap him so the government didn't keep him working. So if you see anybody banging on the doors, just stay really, really quiet. He's not home. He's totally not faking it so he could miss work for this podcast, but we're totally worth it in the event that he actually was.
I'm in a
Is that enough
Connex
of a
at their parking lot. They'll never let
right. He's technically on the clock, but we don't ask too many questions. That's just a green screen in the background of his normal awesome office. We're gonna go with it. All right, Nick. Are you ready to ask them the religion question, Nick?
Yes,
you have the power tonight.
The power of religion.
Oh shit, I messed up, Nick. This is all your fault, but I messed up. We forgot to let them introduce themselves. So, Nikki P, can you introduce yourself to the listeners and viewers? Well, we're professionals.
Hi, I'm Nikki P. I am a marketing person from Iron Age Marketing, and really into books. So that's how I kind of found my way to this whole world. It's been a long time since we had good books, and then all of a sudden I found there was this thing where people were making good books again, and I'm like, let's become a part of that.
Okay, and what about you, Richard, of Iron Age Media?
Well, I started up Iron Age Media just less than a year ago. It's a website that covers indie creators of a large variety of mediums and genres. I've also recently started up Anvil Magazine, which the first issue is funded and going out very soon.
All right, in the next part of the introduction, dear listeners, how we first found them. So we were looking to book things, do a little bit differently than just standard author interviews. And our good friend of the show, Declan Finn, said, hey, these guys over at Iron Age Media, hashtag, all that sounds really interesting. You should talk to them about it. And he was scheduling you guys with a bunch of other people too. So I said, sure, let's jump on that gravy train. And the rest, as they say, is history. And now that I've covered from my mistake, Nick, now you can ask your question. You know what? We'll blame Doc. She's not here.
Yeah, we'll put it on Doc.
She's sick.
Wherever doesn't show up,
I don't know.
Gets the blame gets pinned on. Make sure you send the hate mail to her for this episode. All right. So for the religion question, Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
You go first there.
Oh, super easy. Firefly, far and away.
Okay.
Yeah, same here. I think
There we go. That's right.
I could maybe argue for Star Wars, but Firefly, yeah.
So you guys would agree that Gail Berman is the devil?
I am not upset about Firefly ending where it did. I think that the more based on some of the interviews that were given, that season 2 might have taken a pretty different turn in terms of tone. So I kind of like it the way it is.
Just knowing where Joss was going to go, I think it's probably better it ended where it did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I just think Fox Entertainment's where good shows go to die, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll have good viewership, high ratings, and they're like, nah, kill it.
This is going to be for you younger viewers. This is going to be for you younger viewers who don't understand the concept of DVR. But back in the day, before we had to videotape everything with a little cassette deck, we actually could tell our TV to record a show at this time slot. And you'd say, hey, Firefly comes on at Fridays at 9, recorded at Fridays at 9. But it didn't actually record Firefly. It recorded that time slot on that channel. So if they bumped it for something else, you got the last hour of a football game and then 5 minutes of your show and you missed it. But they didn't adjust for that when they did the Nielsen ratings. So any show that was just bumped by the DVR got horrible ratings, and they couldn't figure out what's because everyone that's recording it on the go to come back to couldn't do that because you won't keep a consistent time. And so they got screwed by evolving technology and piss poor management.
Mostly the latter, I think.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, all right, Nick,
what it is.
carry the fantasy side of the house.
All right. And because we're polytheistic, Game of Thrones, The Wheel of Time, or Conan the Barbarian?
Go ahead.
Conan, I don't like too much politics in my fantasy. I just want dragons and stuff getting slashed up.
Word.
And Bikini Chainmail's not bad.
Yeah. I think I am not the strongest fan of any of those in terms of what I've actually watched. Probably Lord of the Rings is probably the thing that I've watched the most fantasy wise. So I'm going to have to pull the red herring there.
No, that's fine. So we actually used to be Game of Thrones, Wheel of Time, or Lord of the Rings, but Lord of the Rings kept beating everyone, so we felt like that was unfair to everything else. And we intentionally picked properties that were multi-media venues, so like it had the movies, the books, whatever, because like we're not going to yuck someone else's yum. However they engage with content, it's all valid. Which means there's some really iconic properties that, you know, unless you're a book nerd, you might not have heard of. That's why we try to balance it. But yeah, Lord of the Rings for sure for me too. And Nick's a heretic, so he's probably going to say something like the murder hobo. I mean, Game of Thrones.
First of all, nothing is true. Everything is permitted. I would take out the Wheel of Time, and I would throw in the Beastmaster or any of the other great fantasy movies that came out during my childhood.
80s and 90s was a good time for fantasy movies.
Yes, definitely.
80s and 90s was a good time for all film. As a science fiction person, we had some real gold there.
Yeah, we're going to have a moment of silence where we just get nostalgic for the past. Okay, it's past. Now that we've done that. All right, so we here at the Blasters and Blades love both the fantastical and the scientific. But Nikki, what was your first love, sci-fi or fantasy?
I mean, in truth, my true love is horror. And I like it better when it spills over into the other genres. I just love everything weird, I guess, would be my thing. If I had to pick, the thing that really got me started off is technically fantasy. It was the Stephen King's Dark Tower series. I read that and just it was a rabbit hole from there. Couldn't get enough. Okay,
what about you, Richard? Sci-fi or fantasy?
Sci-fi, definitely. I don't know. I think that some of the blendings before those had fully separated is where I probably got started, but I love sci-fi. That's definitely my bread and butter.
Okay.
Same.
That's a good answer.
Same, Richard. Same.
It's like you guys are twins or something. So what was your first memory of engaging in speculative fiction as a genre? Was it games, TV, books, movies? Like, where did you discover the genre? Nikki?
Honestly, it was reading through my dad's old books. Like my dad was an avid reader, and you know, I think I read through everything that was R.L. Stine and Fear Street or whatever that the school had to offer. Eventually, I started picking up my dad's books like The Dark Half and stuff like that.
Okay, what about you, Richard?
Yeah, I would also say books. I think I'm trying to think of what I would have started with. I think one of the earliest books that I started with, where I got really interested in them, were the Dinotopia series by James Gurney. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but those are beautifully illustrated and wonderful stories for children. And so that and then, like, I guess, did you guys ever watch Wishbone whenever you were a kid? That was probably another.
I think that came out after us, I was young. My kids watched it, though. Young whippersnapper. What about you, Nick? Did you ever watch the Dinotopia? Was that your jam back in the day?
Nah. I was watching like Thundar the Barbarian.
Oh, well, Dinotopia is only a book series. I think it has the TV series, but it was like a...
I didn't read a whole lot. I was reading a lot of the, I guess it's considered the Legacy series of Star Wars. I was reading a lot of that when I was younger. Like Splinter in the Mind's Eye. Oh, Wedge is the man, dude.
I'm just saying Porkins. He has a special place in my heart.
Yeah, they didn't write much about Porkins.
They should have. It's a critical failure on Lucas's part.
He got fried up like a chicharrone.
What about you, Nick?
Went wrong.
Yeah, Nikki, did you like the Dinotopia? I'm a huge dinosaur nerd, so.
Honestly, I didn't have much exposure to that until I think later on. You know, getting bored and seeing what did I miss when I was a kid? What wasn't I interested in back then?
Okay. All right. If you like the Dinotopia, dear listener, you should comment on that in the comment section wherever you're listening, and we'd love to hear about it. But lest I ramble, Nick, the next question is yours.
I'll save you. I'll throw you a lifeline. What do you love most about speculative fiction as a genre?
That's a ready. Yeah, I was gonna say that's a hard one. I just always like seeing the way that people take potential ideas and extrapolate them out into interesting places that I never would have taken them otherwise. That's one of the reasons why I like sci-fi in particular, is that you have a more formulaic response to adding in like particular technology or a alien race or something, and exploring that whole theory of how things interact and what shakes out of all those changes.
Okay. And if you hear a dog barking in the background, that's just Nick's kids. They're running around acting like crazy. Don't blame the dogs.
I mute when I'm not talking now because I don't know. They're dumb.
They're adorable though when you share pictures.
Oh yeah, they're like really super sweet and cute, and they're very photogenic. But if you have to live with them, you're like, today's the day I strangle a dog.
All right. Sorry to interrupt.
I think if you wanted me to comment on that one, I mean, for me, I love the idea of kind of getting in a window to how people see solving the big problems is, because all speculative fiction, you're looking at ways that people think we can create a better society in one way or another, especially like within science fiction. Or they're warning us about the terrible things they're going to do to us. Either way, it's good to know rather than not know.
Some books, it's important that we remind them that it was a cautionary tale and not a how-to manual.
Well,
V for Vendetta comes to mind.
I would actually argue, if you look into the history of most of the people that have written our classic sci-fi, I think they were actually just telling us what they were doing. It was a coming attractions.
Yeah. 1984 is really kind of up front and center with the playbook.
I mean, look at Aldous Huxley's relationship to the eugenics movement.
I got in a fist fight once discussing eugenics.
That's usually what happens.
Yeah. I won the fight, therefore I won the argument.
This is the way. This is how it works.
This is the way.
This is the way. All right, Nick. I think we're on number 10. We don't want to go too violent or they'll censor us.
Oh, yeah, no. We're doing so well. All right, let's start off with Nikki. How did your love of the speculative fiction genre transition into your writing stories in the wild world of speculative fiction?
Well, it's been kind of a will they won't they thing my whole life. Like, am I ever going to be able to do this? Really, ultimately, I will say I kind of gave up on the writing of the fiction as opposed to trying to help other people create their vision. Because, I'll be honest, as much fun as writing is, it's way more fun reading for me. So I guess the most active way for me that it has lived out is, working in the TTRPG realm. Anytime I get to DM or GM with one of the games I like to play, that's probably the most selling outlet that I have.
What games do you like to play?
New World of Darkness is my favorite. And, D&D is always fun.
Classics.
Okay. Classics. I like it.
Richard, you want to take a stab at this one?
Well, I mean, I'm not an author, but I have, decided to get involved in this because I have noticed the quality of fiction declining, I feel like, in the past, especially the past decade. And, I was drawn in particular to trying to foster short fiction because I think that some of the most interesting ideas that are most, unencumbered by kind of a larger story are often from short fiction. So they're long enough to, illustrate an interesting idea, but not so long that they feel the need to, satisfy every bit of the reader's desires and communicate all of the things of a broader, like a proper character arc and a, lore background and all these other things that usually pop up. So that's kind of why I'm going to take that to mean more like Anvil. That's why I decided to get into publishing Anvil and kind of acting as an editor in that regard.
I love short fiction too. That's actually how I started reading, because my sisters were in Girl Scouts, so I was sort of tagging along, and they had all of those Reader's Digest questions, or not questions, the Reader's Digest, stories that are like basically turning larger stories into short stories. And so I'm kind of passionate about it. So I like that you're involved there. I think people would be surprised at how much of the iconic science fiction shows that they grew up watching were inspired by Philip K. Dick's short stories. I think he has the most converted properties from his short story collections.
Yeah.
That or probably Stephen King, but you never know.
Well, I would say actually, I would say I would go with Bradbury, except for the problem was Bradbury was actually writing most of those shows himself also, so it wasn't converting. He just straight up wrote the episodes.
Yeah, that's true.
That's fair. But yeah, so I don't know. I'm a huge supporter of short fiction. So we'll have to get together offline and see if we can bump some of those shows, because I'm like we used to do Short Fiction Wednesday interviews if we found authors that had stuff they wanted to talk about with their short content, and that's always fun. So, but Nick, save me from myself again and ask number 11.
Always, I got a lifeline ready for you. It's on hot standby. Many authors let their own real life experiences influence the stories they tell. Were there any specific formidable moments that really shaped you as a storyteller, Nick? Not me, Nick. You, Nick.
Wow, he's asking himself a question. This is great.
That's very meta.
Lost it. It's very meta.
I don't know if there's any like special moment. For me, just the ability to immerse yourself in another world has always really been the draw. I guess growing up a fairly nerdy kid, my desire to escape the boredom of everyday life and do anything else is really what kind of drew me to that. So the more excitement, the better, I guess.
Yeah, escapism. Okay. Finding yourself in the hero or the villain, depending on what you're reading.
Well, which in that regard, like the escapism quality of it is, I think, what draws guys like me and Richard to what we're trying to do within the Iron Age movement is we weren't getting the quality of our escapism that we wanted. And we found this other people starting to do it and not getting noticed, or, failing to be able to put all the pieces together to push what they're trying to do. And, it was nice for me that like I have skills that I could help people build their name, build their audiences, make enough money that maybe they can keep doing this. And in a very self-serving way, keep making stories that I want to read.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's a good answer.
Yeah, it makes sense. That's why I started doing indie comics.
Absolutely. So this is the, so you guys are not producing content like we would interview authors and you would be talking, we would talk to them about what they've produced, but you guys have both helped other people get their content out to market. So we'll start with you, Richard. What is the piece of fiction, it doesn't matter if it's short, long, whatever, what is the piece that you've helped bring to market that you're the most proud of? Do you have a favorite? Now, obviously you love all of your children equally, but they're not listening. So,
well, okay. I mean, it's not quite out to market yet, but I am very happy with the feature story from Anvil issue number 1, which is the Fleet of Theseus by Daniel J. Snow.
Okay.
He's a fiction author who is actually the son of another author that I knew, but I didn't know that I knew whenever I was selecting the stories. So that's personally probably my favorite piece that's come out. As far as things that have gone up on the website, I would have to think back on it, or things that I've promoted. I'm not sure. I think I would have to kind of revisit that quite a bit. So I don't know. That's my best answer. The feature story for issue number 1 of Anvil.
All right.
Okay. And what about you, Nikki?
Well, and for me, allow me to say, I'm very new with a lot of this. Like he's been around less than a year. I've been around even less time than he has. I heard Razor Fist mention Iron Age on a podcast like maybe 6 months ago. I'm like, I have to be involved with this. And so I think my first episode of Iron Age Marketing Podcast came out in January. And I've been releasing, weekly episodes talking to independent authors or even some people that have like, publishing deals and stuff like that. And one of the things that has been an issue is making a book now is easier than it's ever been. Like actually producing a book is super easy. But the part that comes after that is no one ever talks about it. No one's like, hey, how do you actually get people to read it? How do you get in front of people? And so I'm trying to take my past 5 years of working in marketing and podcasting and give authors a platform and give them a place to talk about the part that nobody ever talks about. Like, what has worked for you? How did you manage to get an audience? How are you not buried in obscurity? And sometimes you find, even when I have guests on, that like, oh, they're still pretty buried in obscurity. And, there's ways that we can help fix that. Whether it's email lists, there's very simple, non-complicated things that you can do to help people get out there. Even like most people will be afraid to go on podcasts and things like that. Like, what do I have to say? And it's like, if you can make somebody not have to work on what to put out content wise for a week, they'll probably have you on because it just makes their life easier. Come up with any kind of concept, pitch it, and more than likely people will have you on if you're not a total loser or total weirdo.
And coming from Nick and I have been doing podcasts for a long time ourselves. The other big thing that gets you on, and it doesn't matter how new you are to the game, if you're willing to share it, because it's, podcasting that the guest plays his equal role of sharing to his audience as you do sharing to yours. And when you get authors who have a reputation for not, or, content creators for not returning the favor, won't share it. They stop getting invited back after a while.
That is absolutely. Absolutely,
it's a symbiotic relationship.
And that's been a topic of conversation on my show, in which I've talked to guests. Like, now I've had fairly people that you'd think would be a good get for a guest, and then they don't do anything to promote the episode. It's like, dude, I took my time. I put a lot of effort into producing my episodes, making sure the content, SEO, and all that stuff is good. And then you don't even give me a tweet, like the bare minimum of anything. And it's frustrating when that happens. And it's more frustrating when it's coming from someone who, frankly, doesn't have much of a following to begin with, but they can't even give you you might get 5 people out of them, but they can't even give you that. And you're like, I'm kind of get why nobody knows who you are.
Yeah, right.
We've actually had some of our surprisingly high traffic episodes were from debut authors because they shared the heck out of it. And I don't know if they twisted arms and got their granny and their neighbor and Bob from up the street, but they got views. So I don't think your reach on sales necessarily is the same as your reach with your getting yourself out there. It's just how willing you are to grind.
Yeah. When you first brought me on, when you guys interviewed me, I boosted my tweets, and I only had maybe 150 people that, followed me. And I boosted on Facebook because I'm like, hey, look, it's me. I'm on a podcast.
So when we've told the story briefly, I think, but we'll elaborate. When we first did, we got along when Nick and I were tweeting, going back and forth in Messenger, him and I and Doc. We're like, okay, there's chemistry. Let's do a voice call just to make sure, because not everyone has the voice for the personality for radio, shall we say. I've got the face for it, but so we were doing a live,
that's what
FaceTime message. Yeah, we did a FaceTime message where the 3 of us were talking, and his wife came in and threatened to stab him because he was taking too long. And we're like, well, we can't let him die for nothing, so we had to have him on the show.
It was a
we
pity
didn't want
hire.
to stab you to get him. It was a pity hire, but we're glad we did. All right, so before we. Yeah, that's how she got a nickname Stabby, because she literally threatened to stab. She had a butcher knife, Richard, a butcher knife in her hand. You don't mess with a woman with a butcher knife.
No, you shouldn't.
It's not the recipe for a long life.
Yeah, there's no good ways out of that situation.
No.
So before we dive into this hashtag for the Iron Age and Iron Age media in general, we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man. So thank you for this one, Larry and John.
Once, long ago, Jackson Rook was a war hero. Raised from boyhood to pilot a mech, he fought gallantly for the rebellion against the collectivists. Now he's a criminal, a smuggler with a new mission: steal a top-of-the-line mech and deliver it to a world so hostile, even the air will kill you. In the smuggling business, it's best to take the money and ask no questions. But when the client runs roughshod over the planet's citizens, Rook must look deep inside and see if the heart of a warrior still beats within. Gunrunner, by best-selling authors Larry Correia and John Brown. From Bain Books at bainbooks.com.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. And so before we get started, why don't either one of you can answer from here on out? It's just, you're both working with the Iron Age media and Iron Age marketing and the hashtag and all that. So what was the origin for this? How did this all start?
Well, I mean, as far as I know, the earliest usage of the term in terms of like comics and culture was from Peter Simeti over in Alterna Comics. He mentioned it kind of as like an Iron Age return to basics. And then later, Razor Fist, who by his own admission, he wasn't sure if he'd heard the term or if he just came up with it. He popularized it with the Iron Age of, he was talking about comics, but at that point in time, I took it and ran with just kind of everything, because I'm more of a, there's other mediums that are much more familiar to me and interesting to me than comic books. Not to say I'm not interested in them. I just historically haven't been as into comic books. So
don't cry, Nick. It's going to be okay. He just hasn't read your comic books yet.
Oh, it's fine. I'm just making faces for the YouTubers.
So what is it so that's the sort of how you heard of it and sort of where it went from there. But what made you decide, what, I really care about this fantasy stuff and I want to try to improve the market? Because a lot of people will complain about things and then do nothing about it.
Well, my kind of canned answer is that, many years ago, I was very, very concerned about politics, right? I was very involved in politics. I still think that that's important, but at the time I kind of became disenchanted with the ability, or at least my ability, to affect any kind of political change. And so then I looked into finances and whatnot, and that's where I kind of got into crypto for a while. And I've played around with that because I think that, it's very difficult to win against the house. You know what I mean? So, try and build your own house. But then after a while in crypto, I realized that a lot of the people who were building these systems, the libertarians had largely fled the area and had been replaced with the exact same, like culturally identical people as everybody else you would expect in a, San Diego or San Francisco, flat. And so all these people, or at least all the people who controlled the culture of crypto, were all mostly left wing. And there's a few exceptions, but it's not, it made me realize that I was once again pushing on the wrong buttons. And so I was looking for ways to get involved in culture. And I wasn't necessarily even doing that. I was just kind of thinking about it. And then Razor Fist put out that video and I went, oh yeah, you know what? This particular crypto project that I've been on is kind of stalled out for a month, and I'm going to take a month and build a website, and then everything just kind of like tumbled after that, so.
Okay. What about you, Nikki? So you came on after the fact. So what was it that said, I want to take that plunge?
Well, for me, like, that's funny. I have a very similar story. I was involved in libertarian politics for a long time, and then kind of got disenfranchised with that and got really involved in the homestead movement. And, I found those people way cooler because they were all doing stuff. One of the things they're always doing is, find your own business, find your thing to do. And so I started getting really, really into marketing and kind of chasing that down as a way that I can have a job where I don't have to show up to the factory anymore or whatnot. And one of the joys of my week is listening to Gary at Nerdrotic and the Critical Drinker talk about, nerd stuff, the stuff that's I've always been passionate about and liked reading. And Razor Fist comes on. He has this video at some point. He gets into the mix and he does this hail to the Iron Age. And so I start looking around, searching for the Iron Age. Eventually, I find Richard's website here, and I'm like, I can remember geekily, like, super excited to find the website message. Like, dude, how can I help? What can I do? Please lead me. Eventually, I just kind of found my own thing to do within the movement. But this idea, once I started meeting people, especially within this circle, it was just so many people that were had come from similar places I had, or had similar ideas. I was always surprised at how many Christian people were writers, and it's like I didn't realize there were that many Christian people left in the world. I'm not Christian, but it was interesting to find. It's like, wow, there's so many people writing Catholic books.
Yes, yeah.
But I also felt like there was a bit of maybe an over indexing towards people that kind of wanted to necessarily make it about politics, and I don't think it had to be. For me, it was more about this idea of, and I'm an old school leftist. Like we talked military before. I'm like, no, I read Noam Chomsky way too early to get involved in the military. And so for me, it was about left or right. It doesn't matter. The whole system is corrupt, and it's promoting things that are in nobody's best interests. I don't care if you're an LGBTQ person or if you're a right winger, whatever you are. There's people that put more interest in fomenting ideas than putting out content than anybody wants. And I don't care what company you're looking at. Is it Disney, Fox, whatever? Nobody is really giving anybody what they want, and they're expecting us to hand over our hard-earned money. And part of that works because they have this giant apparatus set in place to do all that. And having worked in marketing, I realize it doesn't have to be that complicated. There's simple things that smaller creators can do to build their own audiences. More importantly, we're looking at trust in institutions collapse around us every day. Like everybody's getting sick and tired and, can't believe the people that are around them. So, I'm like, how can I step in and help this? And kind of these people that have cool ideas and whatnot, go out and find the biggest audiences that they can.
Okay. So when you say the Iron Age hashtag, the Iron Age media hashtag, so what, like obviously it's fantasy because Iron Age fantasy. What makes you different than the general sword and sorcery?
Well, I don't know, and feel free to jump in. But this is kind of
the Iron Age is more
a discussion,
of a history thing.
Yeah, I was going to say it's more of a recognition of an existing set of things that are happening.
Like you know the Golden Age of comics, the Silver Age of comics.
So those things were
Age.
Using comics as an example, the Golden Age and Silver Age. These are things that were retroactively applied to something, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? They didn't go out and announce themselves as the Golden Age necessarily. And I've had some people criticize the term the Iron Age because we're like kind of declaring it. But I would make the argument that you have within the science fiction and fantasy realm, you have the sad puppies movement, and then you had like the Gamergate whole debacle, which wasn't terribly creative, but it was more of a fan driven reaction. And since then, you've seen a growing number of indie games, although they haven't been particularly any ideologically different. And then you've seen Comicsgate, really. And then like Pulp Rev and all these other things start bubbling up. To me, the Iron Age is a recognition of all of these existing creator-driven movements, if you will. So creators are already like saying, screw the publishers. We're doing direct to the customer. I'm not worrying about anything except quality. And I say quality over ideology is one of my, catchphrases. And so that's kind of the thing that has driven some of my thinking, at least. I don't know how you feel about that.
Same here for sure. Like to me, Iron Age, it was the idea of, individuals going out and forging their own path, saying, we don't need you to build a way for us. We're going to do it ourselves. I'm going to assist. And that's why when Anvil came out, I'm like, there's not a more perfect name for a magazine for like this movement than Anvil. You're going to go out, you're going to forge it, you're going to hammer this out, make it whatever you want it to be. And you're going to go cut down anything in your way to make this happen. Like this, so to me, like nothing but Iron Age really makes sense to describe what it is.
So what I'm hearing is your movement is a response to fans, consumers of the content saying, we're not being served. You're ignoring us for insert reasons, because each side has a different reason for ignoring the consumers. And you're trying to meet the need that's not being filled. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say it's that. And at least for myself, I think that there's a lot of different little nascent movements that are around. Comicsgate and Pulp Rev, and some of the just smaller indie pub like Supervisive. I believe I'm saying that correctly. So there's all these little, I don't want to call them cliques because they're not necessarily that, but there's all these little subgroups out there. And the thing about them is that, and you see this all the time. Like, let's take ISOM #1, for example. People are criticizing Eric July for not moving faster, right? Or, they've said, oh, well, we need more, we need more. And that's fine. That's kind of a problem you want to have. But there are bandwidth restrictions whenever you're kind of not in the factory production method of things. And so I think that there's a lot of fans who are in Comicsgate who, if they wanted to read some short fiction, they might actually be interested in this. But all the short fiction they've been exposed to is just kind of garbage, or it just doesn't exist because they don't care. I mean, they get some kind of like thinly veiled analog for the political topic of the day with some magic spray painted over the top of it and told that, oh, this is good fantasy. You know what I mean? And so they're like, I don't even like fantasy. It's not that they don't like fantasy. It's just that they don't like the garbage that is in the mainstream. So
they don't like their options.
Yeah, exactly. So really, to me, that my goal with the Iron Age is to let people know, especially within these little groups that are already consuming this content, let them know that there are other people in totally different mediums and genres that they might want to check out, essentially.
Well, and to group like piggyback on that, for me, so much about this is when you understand economics and you can see why things happen. The real issue with a lot of the media is that you have people in charge pandering to very small subsets at the expense of larger groups of people. And this does two things, frankly. The subset that they're pandering to gets a watered down, filtered version because they still have to kind of make it more mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
But going after that niche in the first place takes the broadcast media and makes it niche media. And so now you've upset everyone else in that. The irony is saying, why do any of us have to water down our media? Why do we have to watch anything that's not what we want? There's a million creators out there. Like, I'm a musician, and so a lot of this happened in the music industry 20 years ago when you got really cheap to record music and put out your own albums. That suddenly any taste that you could ever want to meet was suddenly out there. You could find the literal perfect band for you. Well, and now the fiction movement is having its own renaissance in that way, where everything has been democratized. Making books and comics is so easy now that you can be a Joe Schmo from your mama's basement and put out whatever you want.
The quality is going to maybe not be the best, but everybody has a voice now, is what we're saying.
Yeah.
But the thing is, really, if we nurture those voices, eventually we will start getting higher caliber writing in all of those things. If the more of those people don't have to work straight jobs and can like support themselves with it, then eventually we'll.
to strengthen those voices is doing stuff like you do by inspiring and helping people bring their ideas to light. Because I do that too on the comic book side of the house. I got people coming up and be like, "Hey, Nick, how much for your time?" I'm like, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm an indie creator. My time is free. What do you got?" Here's the things that I've learned in 12 years doing this, is that I didn't have anybody to help me when I started. So any chance I get to help somebody else to learn about my pitfalls and tribulations and what worked, what didn't work, where to get your book printed, whatever, I'm your guy. I'm going to hook you up. Just don't text me at like 4:00 in the morning. I'm asleep.
Look, I did it one time. All right. I'm sorry.
You did it twice, JR. Twice. And then you text Stabby, who's also asleep, to wake me up, which she did by stabbing me with her knuckle.
Well, it's funny you joke about that. I do take money for the services after, but I'll end any of my first calls with
charge.
Charge now. Here's the thing. So I'll end any conversation. I'll do a single consultation, and then I'll leave it as this. We can leave this meeting one of two ways. You can be my friend, and then you email me, you message me. I'll do my best to get back to you. Now, if you need it quicker than that, you can start paying me, and I'll go to work for you. It's like you pay me to be like a deploy my time when I have it to give. You can have as much of that as you want for free.
Yeah, you definitely have to make that distinction, because you start getting away free advice. Most of the times they won't take it because it's free. Apparently, anything that has value needs to be paid for with something of value.
Well, and you're
absolutely right. Clients versus friends, which can be both.
All of the people that I've talked to in this space, like everyone who's writing, doing comics, books, whatever out there, I've never met anyone who's not willing to share what they have. Like everyone who's been on the show is like, please, if you have questions, message me, email me, call me, whatever, and I will do my best to help you, because no one who's gone through the grind wants anyone else to have to go through what they had to. Like they want it to be. I think because many of us are fans. Like
there's some people who definitely, I think, do have that sentiment, but
I haven't met him yet, thankfully.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, but I think that broadly speaking, the spirit of the Iron Age is also that, and I think it's a recognition that we have a lot of lost skills. You know what I mean? Like I feel like there's a lot of skills that have been that used to be able to, if you wanted to for writing or something like that, you really wanted a top tier education in literature and everything else, you could go to a college for that. You know what I mean? And you could actually get something of value out of that. That's been gutted. You know what I mean? And so all of these skills have been kind of scattered to the wind. They're out there for free usually, but finding all of this stuff and reassembling a proper set of tools for some of these creators to actually start working with is quite difficult. So, I think that's another key part of the whole Iron Age moniker in my mind, anyway.
Well, and that's awesome that you guys are doing that, because you're dead on in your assessment. It's like there are a lot of lost skills out there.
So what do you think, like you mentioned lost skills, is there anything that you think is the most that you've noticed the most problematic when it comes to these, I don't know if problematic's the right word, but that you see the most people struggling with when they're trying to get themselves into this creative space?
Okay, this is kind of a weird but very broad, and this is because it is the most, at least in my opinion. I think the biggest skill is still out there, obviously, but the biggest skill that I see a lot of people lacking is just a sense of professionalism, and the fact that just because you are indie does not mean that and maybe you are technically an amateur, it doesn't mean you need to act like one. You know what I mean? You can be a novice, but there are a lot of people that I've seen struggle with. They don't realize that they lack that skill, and some people are very easy to work with, and those are the people who I think have an appreciation for everybody's time involved. You know what I mean? But then you have other people who don't have any appreciation for your time, and oftentimes I see them struggling later on. It's because they don't even have an appreciation for their own time. You know what I mean? And so I would say, broadly speaking, that's probably it. As far as like literary capabilities and artistic skill and everything else, I don't know. I'm not talented enough to necessarily critique those people, at least in my opinion. So
I like terrible stuff too.
Oh,
there's room for campy and B-roll.
I'll send you some of my earlier work. You'll love it.
But, well, in addition to what he was going to say, the thing that I think is probably a skill that, and this is partly because of the demographic of people we tend to be working with. Everyone, the big thing you're trying to do when you're trying to sell and market and do all this stuff is build relationships and foster community. And in general, we tend to be dealing with people that like to be left alone to read a lot. And so going out and doing the things that are necessary to build community and to sell yourself, which are useful skills in absolutely every walk of life, they're definitely, I had an interview last week that the guy's released multiple books. He's done very well, and I'm surprised at how little of the things that I would deem are just absolutely necessary to build a fan base he's done. He's functioning, I guess, as a writer, but like his own level of communication is holding him back from what he could be doing more of, just because, you know, he's a quiet guy and kind of likes to keep to himself. And unfortunately, when you're trying to build community and foster growth and whatnot, you meet people more like you. You have to go out and do the legwork of actually going out there, or at least putting yourself out there.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I would love for that situation to be different in the future, you know, and that's part of what the whole Iron Age media thing is. It's trying to like take some of that pressure off of creators. But the reality is that unless you're willing to hire somebody to be your face and your, you know, like your community building and everything else, and you can actually do that in an authentic manner, you know, like you're going to have to do it yourself, at least at first. So it's a difficult, you're right. It is largely the number of people or the type of people that are drawn to the creative space, especially on the writing side. It's difficult.
And I think like it's going to become more and more important, like the authenticity part, because like I mentioned earlier, institutions are failing. Trust is at an all-time low. And then we add deep fakes and AI into this mix. And it's becoming harder and harder to trust anything. And so if you can build and foster trust people and who you are, like I think that the personal small group relationships that you can build with different authors is just only going to become more important, because you sure can't trust any of the big names, because what's this, you want to get upset about Star Trek and Sulu and his Twitter and the fact that he's never actually run his Twitter. Somebody runs his Twitter, so God knows what he actually thinks. You know, you want people that are engaging with the audiences themselves and being a part of that community, and it's only going to become more important, I think.
Right. JR, you got something else you want to add?
Yeah, no, I was muted because, you know, I'm a professional and I've done this before.
No, you're my cough and my dog.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier Anvil. What exactly is that, Richard?
So Anvil, Iron Age magazine, is my attempt at kind of bringing back I don't want to call it like a centralized brand, but I wanted to try my hand at branding out actual content that was a kind of a smattering of what indie creators within the Iron Age had to offer. And so it's comics, and the first issue is just one comic, and then a collection of short stories and a couple of short reviews. And in this first one, there's also a solo RPG, which is very fun, but I'm not going to be doing that again because that's a lot more editing work than I anticipated initially. But the issue number 1 has the 11-page preview from Ghost of the Badlands by Razor Fist and George Alexopoulos in it. You can actually see it in its entirety on their campaign right now, but this will be the first time it's in print, and it's going to be definitely higher quality than what is available digitally right now. And then 5 illustrated short stories. Whenever I say that, I mean each one has at least 2 illustrations, and then 2 more from the Iron Age Media prompt submissions, which are constantly rolling over, but those are just 2 that I enjoyed in particular. We wanted to get them in there. And the solo RPG, which is kind of a choose your own adventure with a little bit of dice rolling.
You had me at choose your own adventure. So that was my jam.
It is still in demand for a little bit longer. So if you want to check it out, you can go to Indiegogo or just go to ironage.media and click the banner for Anvil magazine.
Okay. So is that going to be available in print as well, or is it just going to be digital?
Oh, it's currently only physical right now.
Okay.
I'll be sending out a digital copy with every physical 2 weeks after shipping, just because I want people to get the physical copy first and kind of get a feel for how that works. The second issue, I'm likely to offer a digital only tier after dealing with the insanity of international shipping rates and having some people frustrated by that. So
is this only going to be the Iron Age media and Iron Age movement? Is this purely going to be a fantasy-based thing, or do you think you'll expand into science fiction?
Oh,
and
I mean,
space opera?
oh yeah, I mean, like in Anvil, we've got kind of what's here. We have speculative sci-fi, which is that Fleet of Theseus that I enjoyed. I enjoyed all these, obviously, but we have a kind of a Sherlock Holmesian paranormal story. We've got classic sword and sandal, a cyberpunk action, and then a sort of vaguely faith-based fantasy as well. So there's a big like broad set, and we're already taking story submissions for the second issue, and that's going to be vaguely kind of like a light horror theme, because that'll be coming out in October. So,
well, I mean, in general, the Iron Age thing really to me is just a self-publishing moniker. Like, I put almost a place of self-publishing.
It's more about delivery method and how big you are. You know what I mean? Like you're not a traditional publisher. You're not a major corporate entity, and you're providing primarily direct to customer. You know what I mean? So you're not selling to Netflix to sell to their customers. You know what I mean?
I think a lot of the fantasy part of like why people assume that it's fantasy is because
Iron.
for the well, I don't even know about that, but for the past year, the people that have been crapped on the most by media are people that are interested in Lord of the Rings, the fantasy people.
That's very
true. That's a recent wound that we've all gone through, and it's just affected that community more. So the timing lines up with that. But I mean, it's whatever your poison, whatever your niche is. I mean, it's about that niche. Mm-hmm. It's just go out and make the content you want.
100%. I think fantasy, at least epic fantasy, is struggling right now because they've got the George R.R. Martin, Patrick Rothfuss problem where they've got series that were never finished, and they're feeling like, well, I'm not going to get burned again, so they won't try new series, and then it's making it harder for people to break in as well.
Well, and I've talked to a lot of authors on my show, and they rush to create the first couple books in anything. Publishers don't like them because they want them to sell series, but nobody wants to read them until the series is finished because of how badly people got burned by George. And it's sad to hear.
I personally also think that the market is just saturated with series. I think that you had a cart driving the horse situation. The publishers are supposed to serve readers. And I think that something around like 20, 30 years ago, we probably had kind of an inversion where the market became largely centralized, so that then the publishers started reading each other's notes, and they all said, oh man, the series so well. Okay, let's get a series. Okay. And I think that as things have gotten more centralized over the last 20 years, at least in the mainstream, right, or the legacy media, I would say, not just as far as like news, but I lump that in with basically all media formats that are, from the past 50 to 100 years. These legacy media publishers saw what sold well, and they just went, oh, well, we want more of those things, rather than like, why did that stuff sell well? That was too hard of a problem. You know what I mean? They just started copying each other.
Well, it's even more entertaining when you look at the stuff that like all of the big names of the past, 30, 40 years, what was the stuff that got them to be writers in the first place? If you go and read On Writing by Stephen King, like, it's just a big homage to EC Comics and Lovecraft and all of the short stories of the 50s. Mm-hmm. That's the stuff that made all of this what it is. So the idea that it all has to be giant novels and epic tales, it's like, that's contrary to how this community has ever functioned.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So do you guys like, one of the things that's come out in the last so long is there's been a push with traditional versus indie publishing when it's come to some of the award spaces. So a lot of the literary awards, if you're not Bain or Tor or Penguin Random House or whatever of the other three that are left, hard to keep track these days with all the mergers, but you really didn't have a chance to win those awards. So for a while it was Dragon, but they've made some changes recently to how they're doing that. And so everyone said, well, money's going to be my only reward. Like I'll laugh all the way to the bank. Do you see something coming out of your movement where they make their own award for, fans of this movement by fans of this movement?
I think it's inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's inevitably. Well, I'm actually really curious what your take on this is, Nikki. I'm personally of the opinion that one of the biggest changes in the past decade is the move from some people. They like congregate into brands because people love brands more than like individual pieces of content. Usually speaking, I feel like so they'll go to like HBO and they'll just kind of they'll just consume whatever HBO has for them.
Well, so I think it's a two-way street. For the longest time, I knew that honestly, Amazon was going to give me stuff that I enjoyed watching.
Mm-hmm.
Like they put out The Expanse, and they put out The Tick, and they put out for my tastes, Netflix wasn't giving me anything I wanted. I was going to go to Amazon. That's definitely changed in the past 5 years. But the bottom line is, I'm a dad. I've got a job. I've got kid, wife and kid. It's easier to just say that, like, oh well, I'm a part of this thing, or this is what I want, because I don't have time to make a lot of decisions, and it's easier for people to kind of pick
100%
and find that thing that you gravitate towards. Just it's that's what it is. But I don't think any of us ever really stops looking for something new and great.
That's true. I think that it is born out of like trying to streamline decision making, but I think that a side effect of that is that you've also seen influencers rise as marketing entities in the past decade. And so I think it's inevitable that there's going to be, and I think there already are to a certain degree, kind of Iron Age influencers, right? They may not, they're probably not branding themselves as Iron Age influencers because they're probably bigger than the hashtag at the moment. You know what I mean? But like I would say, probably within like Comicsgate, Ethan Van Sciver obviously is the center of that. And before he branded the name or anything else that you want to talk about there, he was, I would say, still kind of an influencer tastemaker to a certain degree. And I think that you'll see more of those kinds of things. Now, mind you, that's a little bit complicated because of his skill set, but I think that you'll probably eventually see people who do nothing but, or not nothing, but whose primary, what would you call it, social media presence is interacting with media properties. So,
well, I mean,
those people are inevitable, like you said.
That's kind of what we do in a sense. Like, people that like need to appreciate this stuff and like want to, for me, I just love it so much that I want to share with people. And I've always been that type of nerd, proselytizing what I enjoy.
Same.
It's people like you that make the world go round, Nikki. I will say that maybe it's my age, but the whole concept of an Instagram, not Instagram, but just an influencer in general, like you're famous for being famous, like that just something I have trouble wrapping my head around.
Well, see, that's kind of a bastardization of the idea of an influencer. Like my favorite influencer is Jack Spirko, and it's because the community of people that surrounds him tend to be interested in the same things I'm in and tend to not bump heads with me too much. Like if I want to learn about raising chickens and enhancing my garden, there's going to be people in there that I go to. And is that because he set out to be a famous person? Maybe, maybe not. It's just, when you're new enough to something and what you have to say, people gravitate towards. It's just what happens. Now, if you're talking like people like PewDiePie and stuff like that got super huge, like my daughter, I love the fact that my daughter loves talking to me about fandoms now. She's 9 years old, and for her fandom is the FNAF fandom.
Oh, I see.
So she's no idea what that is.
She's obsessed with like fan theories about Five Nights at Freddy's, the video games.
Okay.
And while I don't particularly like that, number one, I'm excited that it's a horror game. And number two, I'm excited that my daughter's found something and like that she can sink her teeth into, like Dungeons and Dragons and horror was for me when I was growing up.
Yeah, with me, my stepson, same thing. He's really into, Five Nights at Freddy's. I draw the line at Fortnite. I want to crush that dream as hard as I can, as long as I can. I despise that game on every level. Oh, God. Why
don't they just play Legos?
Well, for the record, my daughter's
that's what Minecraft is.
My daughter's never played a single one of the Five Nights at Freddy's games. She's only ever watched the videos and fan theories.
Oh yeah,
okay.
Well, I think it's more enjoyable the game. I've played the game and I'm like, okay. I mean, I'm into Hellraiser. This is kind of very low tier horror for me. You know, it's jump scares and cheesy shit.
Yeah,
bleep that out, JR.
Okay, we'll do. Wink, wink.
Well, what I'm more amazed in is the fact that like what that game was. You don't do anything in that game. You sit in a room and like push buttons, and they managed to make that a convincing game that people were willing to play. I'm like, from a history of video game standpoint, that's pretty amazing that it did as well as it did, considering there's nothing to it.
Yeah,
but
I'm all about sparking passion in people's fandoms. I don't care what it is. Be
Exactly.
passionate about something. I think that's something that's kind of lost in society right now. No long-term fandom, no long-term passion. So whatever the flavor of the week is. So I'll poo-poo on that all day long. But if you have something that's gonna, really influence you.
Look at the brick wall Marvel hit.
Yeah.
Like even the good movies now are like doing nothing. Like all I've heard is pretty good things about like Guardians of the Galaxy. And I know James Gunn rarely like screws up that badly that it's not watchable. And look at the numbers on it. It's nothing.
I used to be the midnight showing guy during the MCU after Iron Man, and that took off and started the MCU. I was the midnight showing guy. Oh, it's Thursday night, 11:59. I was there, and the last Marvel movie I watched in the theater was Ant-Man Quantumania. I was like, okay, that was good. I enjoyed it, but everything else, I was just like, I'll wait till Disney Plus gets it.
So you mentioned, like, on the one hand, you don't want to be gatekeepers, prevent people from servicing whatever weird niche. I mean, there is Yeti romance novels, Sasquatch romance novels out there, and while I don't read it, I got no hate for you if you do. Like, I won't yuck your yum, right? But on the other hand, you want to keep it open for everyone. So you don't want that gatekeeper mentality, but you do want quality. I mean, it used to be, I see some of those major literary awards, and that was a novel I wanted to read. Now I see it and I'm like, oh, that's a warning. I don't want that. It's become so tarnished. So how do you protect the Iron Age media brand going forward so you don't get the same taint that is some of what is corrupting modern fandom culture?
Well, I would say that there's the Iron Age media, like ironage.media is like a brand of my own, and I'm doing my best to like kind of manage that. But as far as like the Iron Age as a whole, like unfortunately, it's kind of beyond our control. You know what I mean? I would say that there's a number of things, and Razorfist kind of talks about this in the original video where he mentioned the Iron Age in reference to the Rippaverse and everything else. But he said that a lot of these gates and everything else movements have been about, like, they've been driven by anger, right, and frustration, and those things are like, I don't blame anybody for feeling angry or frustrated with those various things, you know what I mean? But like Comicsgate is a perfect example. But
we didn't like being preached to anymore.
Yeah, but if you don't have a positive, like if you aren't creating something, then eventually you run out of things to be angry about, and you turn internal. And so I think the Iron Age being a very kind of like broad umbrella, at least this is my hope. My hope is that it being a broad umbrella and trying to highlight more positive and encourage creation, as well as not trying to absorb all of these subcultures that have popped up. I think that that's really where it goes, because I think that Comicsgate should exist, and I think that if people want to keep Comicsgate or some subgroup within it, I think they should. I think that it's up to these individual communities to come up with their own standards and everything else. I'm just, Nikki, you can jump in anytime, but personally, I'm just trying to, kind of provide the umbrella and have like kind of a non-aggression pact.
For me, it's about like, for me, it's just about sharing excitement. Like, I think there are like a lot of consumer movements, as I had a guest refer to Comicsgate. He never came out and said Comicsgate in the episode I did with him. he kept referring to it as like a consumer revolt or a consumer response, because when we're in these nerd spaces, you never know what person's gonna fall where, and most of us don't want to step on anybody's toes. Like, we don't want to make everything a political conversation. And I think the one thing that's from the beginning to me has felt different about like the Iron Age movement versus things like Comicsgate is that it's felt more of like an excitement. It's people are just like, you know what? God, I'm just goddamn happy things are being made. Like, can we just be happy that people are doing stuff? Like, whether or not I like it, great. You know, the more people in the LGBTQ community that go out and make comic books that appeal to them and their people, the less that the people on top are going to have to be able to pander to them, because they're going to have better content that they can watch themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everyone go do your thing. Stop relying on somebody at the top to tell you it's okay and give you a bunch of money to go and make a half-assed version of it. You know,
right? It reminds me of that meme of like, shh, let people enjoy things.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
You know, there's so much space, you know, in the indie world where you're talking about novelizations, comic books, video games, etc., that you can tell your story or make your game for your demographic or the demographic that you're trying to reach. I mean, I think Eric July, he was very successful. I was one of the first ones to order that book. As soon as I heard about it, I was like, let's give it a go. And it's really good. But, you know, there's enough space out there where everybody, like, if you're talking about like diversity, inclusion, all those kinds of talking points and all those kinds of narratives, is that there's enough room in this space for everybody to have their own narrative, to push their own little idea, push their ideas and what they want, the audience that they want to speak to with their story or whatever. You know, I don't know why we keep trying to get mad at the other group. Like Comicsgate's a big stuff, catches a lot of heat. You know, it's like, well, how come you don't have any gay characters? Well, I'll tell you what, if I created a gay character, you'd get mad at me because I am a cis white male.
Yeah, and I don't understand the experience.
And I don't understand the experience, even though I could do as much research, because that's what authors used to do, is do a buttload of research.
Is that what you call it? Never mind. Never mind.
That $50, yeah. Because if I call it research, my deviancy is a tax write-off. So.
Okay, there you go. All right.
What's funny is that you know that video that they were all talking about, like that group of, you know, gay people that got together and had their like, how do we instill more gay characters in comics, things like that. One of my favorite comic creators was actually in that meeting. And it bothered me so much because he's one of the best writers, in my opinion, making comics right now. The Nice House on the Lake was one of his. Like, was it Something Is Killing the Children is one of his. Like, he did a run of you know, this new Sandman that they had out. Like, he's done a bunch of great comics. You know, he's done good runs of Batman. And he'll have like gay and trans characters, but it never bothers me because they're just part of the story. But the stories revolve around things; they're just stories.
Yeah,
and it's you're not. He's successful because he's not shoehorning in ideas in places they don't necessarily need to be, and he's just letting representation be representation. And I can appreciate that, but it was like, dude, I wish any one of these people that you're talking to was half as good at writing comics as you are, and it's like you're letting me down by being here dealing with them and not just being a creator. It's rough.
Yeah.
Okay. So as we wrap this up, if there's anything, dear listener, in the comment section that you wanted us to dive into with the Iron Age media, with some of the topics they brought up that you want us to have them back for, just write that in the comment section or message us directly. We'll list all of our social medias and theirs at the end. But with that being said, Nikki and Richard, was there anything that you guys wanted to tell us that we didn't ask before we wrap this up?
No, I guess just thank you very much for having me on. I enjoyed talking about it. And anybody who wants to learn more about the Iron Age, just hop on Twitter, go to ironage.media, or check out Iron Age Marketing, man. Like, I'm pumped. There's all sorts of people out there. You really you will find somebody that you are excited about, I think.
I've had nothing but fun conversations with people for, you know, since January, and I started doing the podcast. So anyone who's you know, self-publishing out there wants to get on, I look forward to talking to you. If you want help actually building an audience, ironneedsmarketing.com, and I would love to help you.
Okay. So this is the part of the interview, dear listener, dear viewer, where I say, please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book. And rumor has it, when they get their 100th review, the marketing gods will drop off a unicorn for them to grill up. And I, for one, would like to know what a unicorn steak tastes like. And with that being said, before we let you go, Nikki and Richard, how do you take your steaks? There is a wrong answer here. We will judge you. But how do you like your steak?
Medium.
Oh.
As a burger.
As a
burger. Nick, do you want to tell them what the right answer is?
Patty. The right answer is anything below well done.
I was going to say with the right answer is however the hell you want to eat it, but sure, we learned nothing from this episode.
I mean, slathered in blue cheese. That's the important thing for me.
Blue cheese is good. For me, a good vet should be able to bring it back to life.
Yes. Every time I think of that question, when people ask it, I'm reminded of that scene in the Demolition Man where he's eating the burger and he goes, "This is really good." And the female cop, I can't remember her name, she's like, "Do you see any cows around here?" And then a rat scurries across.
Yeah.
Good rat burger.
It's a good rat burger. All right. So as we wrap this up, Nikki, can you tell listeners and viewers how they can find you on the wild interwebs?
ironneedsmarketing.com, or just look up Nikki Pinecone.
That is a unique last name, and it makes it very easy to remember. So we appreciate you picking that.
I thought you were messing with me when you told me who the guest was. I was like, Nikki Pinecone? Is it pronounced like Picone?
My actual name is Nick Picone, but I've been called Pinecone for years. I just said I'm going to own it since I like the nature anyways.
My last name's Garber. I've been called garbage my entire life. I've just accepted it.
I mean, Handley, Hansy, it happens. My drill sergeants had a field day.
Yeah, so did mine.
I feel your pain. All right, and Richard, how can listeners and viewers find you?
Just ironage.media. There's new
really
articles
easy.
and I was going to say there's new articles and new prompts going up all the time. Currently, we've got April voting. So if you want to read some short stories or poetry or even take a look at some art, it's all up there. Vote for your favorites.
Okay. And you can find us, dear listener, over on Twitter at twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. We have a Facebook group where all the shenanigans happen over at facebook.com/groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, /groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. We do have a Facebook page. Eventually we'll get Doc to give a dedicated URL, but in the meantime, you still have to search for it manually. We appreciate that you do. You give the like, follow, and all the things. It does help spread the words. We like to share things like book reviews from Upstream Reviews, book reviews from people's websites, recommendations on the hottest new thing, and of course, our own episodes when they go live. We have a website over at anchor.fm/blasters tack and tack blades. Again, anchor.fm/blasters tack and tack blades, where you can support the show for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on. These episodes aren't free to produce. There is a little bit of overhead, and we do appreciate your generosity. You could support the show more directly over at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put it in the comment section that is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts, Doc Cisca and Nick Garber, duly caffeinated. They will drink until their liver explodes because his mama didn't raise no quitter. And I'm going to assume that's coffee in the cup that you just downed, and totally not straight whiskey.
Absolutely not, sir.
All right. Thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom.